Okay, this morning we begin Bhagavad Gita, and we'll probably be with Bhagavad Gita for the rest of this year or something like that. So, so we'll do a good exploration of Bhagavad Gita. Just a little background. So, I'm not a scholar. From this perspective, from my perspective, these teachings are just about being happy and sharing happiness. It's not about learning something that you can tell others about. So, and there are scholars, and there are those scholars that are very dry and are not necessarily happy either. I learned at the feet of two very happy men. Which was quite something, considering I'd only ever wanted to be happy, and I was always learning from people who weren't. So, and it just doesn't work that well. So, oh my God, what craziness. So I'm not a scholar. My approach when I went to India through Grace, I had asked inside for a teacher, and the teacher came. And the teacher, of course, would be perfect for me. And actually, there were two teachers that I lived with for the time that I was in India. Swami Premananda, whose image is right over here, and then Swami Ramaswarup, whose image is right up here. And my Bhagavad Gita teacher was Swami Ramaswarupananda, and he's very irreverent. He's reverential, but he, in other words, he loves, but he doesn't abide by the customary norms and all of this. In fact, I'll share to get a little flavor of this Bhagavad Gita exploration. There are, in India, of course, just like everywhere, teaching comes in all sorts of different ways, shapes and sizes, and he shared a little story with me about he was with someone who was acknowledged as a great teacher of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, Swamiji learned at the feet of Swami Satchidananda. Swami Satchidananda is up here. He's near the center, his image. And he's a direct disciple of Swami Shivananda. And he was overseeing the Worldwide Divine Life Society organization after Swami Shivananda left the body. So, and a great saint. Many people call Swami Satchidananda St. Francis of the East. He had a thing with all of the animals, all of the creatures, all the beings, just so loving and kind, and you could not know in his presence that you were loved. And so Swami Ramaswarup served him for 35 years. And Swami Satchidananda would love to teach from the Gita, and so that was Swami Ramaswarup's grounding. And then he told me this little story. He said he was with this renowned teacher of the Gita, and there was a class, and Swami Ramaswarup asked if he could bring a tea. He really enjoys chai into the class, and the teacher said, "No, absolutely not." He said, when you're studying Bhagavad Gita, you just study Bhagavad Gita, you bring all of your awareness and attention to that, you don't do anything else, you don't eat, you don't drink, you don't do anything else. And Swami Ramaswarup, undeterred, said, "Okay, I understand." He said, "Is it okay when I'm drinking tea to read the Bhagavad Gita?" And of course, what to say? So Swami Ramaswarup hosts what he calls pretty much every day, tea and Gita at 9 a.m. in his kutir in Ganeshpuri or wherever he is. He moves around some. So that was really my Bhagavad Gita training with him, was a year and a half. And then when I was walking pilgrimage, I carried a little bit, and I carried a couple of books. I carried a miniature Bhagavad Gita in one of my pockets, and in particular in the early times of it, I would refer to it. My goal, as I said, never became a scholar, but the teachings resonated with me so deeply that I wanted to live my life according to them. That's what it was. And so I wanted to embody the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. And I knew pilgrimage would be the time where I'd be tested. And so it was very important to me that I lived it. In particular, the part about not being the body. That's very important for a pilgrim. Because if you take yourself to be the body and can't take the steps to start getting beyond that, how can you walk in faith, in peace? So, and I had made that commitment to the Lord. So I took the Gita with me, and I would refer to it as I was walking. And then this term came, Pilgrim's Gita. So I walked for 2.5 years, and after the walking was over, I asked Swami Ramaswarup. I said, Swamiji, I don't know the Gita anything like you, but I'd like to share, just from a pilgrim's perspective, very practically speaking, some of the teaching of the Gita. Would it be okay with you if I started to offer on Facebook daily commentary on the Gita? Just take a couple of slokas out of the Gita and offer those slokas, and commentary from the masters, and then add some of my observations related to pilgrimage. And he said yes. So Pilgrim's Gita came. So we call this Pilgrim's Gita, this discussion, although it could be tea and Gita too, because tea is certainly allowed. So I did. And I was driving around in Prema, so I got through it once, got through it a second time, and then when ashram came, not too long, and I asked him one more time, and said, okay, now we're in a different environment. Do I have your blessing to offer? And so the answer was yes. And so we started noon workshops at the last ashram location, and now it's the first time back to Gita in, my God, it's probably close to a year. We've been in the mornings with some other scriptures. We just finished Thought Power, and before that was Narada Bhakti Yoga Sutras. We were there for a few months. Yeah, so this morning we begin.
Mommy, oh, hi.
And I'll share with you that a couple of years ago, I was at the Sedona Yoga Fest, and I had a 1 day, 1 hour on Bhagavad Gita, and I made a terrible mistake. I started at the beginning, and the discussion went a place that I hadn't imagined it would go. Because the Bhagavad Gita is set in a war. And so, but it's symbolic of the inner war. It's not about some outer war. But all of a sudden the discussion became about outer war and how war is terrible and all of that. And I had to agree. And I resolved, and I said, Swamiji, please help me. And he reminded me of how he begins Bhagavad Gita study. So we're going to do that this morning. We'll play it safe. He begins it in chapter 6 with two slokas that he says are the essence of the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. That these are the cream of the Bhagavad Gita teaching. So we'll do that this morning. Just a little. And before we start, we'll say a little prayer. But we've got 4 translations here, and there are hundreds or maybe thousands of translations of the Bhagavad Gita. We actually have a 5th here by, and I think it's right here somewhere, Sir Edwin Arnold, which was written 100 years ago. He was a poet, great poet of England, like national poet of England, and for some time. And he'd written a translation which is poetry. And of course, Bhagavad Gita is a song. The literal meaning of the word, Gita is song, Bhagavad is God. So song of God, that's the literal translation. And it's sung. No, you won't hear Swami singing it. because that's not my expertise either. But in India, if you're with a competent teacher of the Bhagavad Gita, then it's chanted, so sung. And there's a very specific meter, and there's a very specific raga, a very specific melody to it as well. So, and the words have the Sanskrit words, when chanted in this way, do have great power in them. There's 701 slokas, 701 couplets in the Bhagavad Gita, so it's not very long. Actually, it comes from a book, a story called the Mahabharata, which is the story of the Great War of Bharat. The Maha is great, and Bharat is India. So the Great War of India, which might have happened. Some will say yes, some will say no, but for all intents and purposes, it's happening all the time. That is 55,000 couplets. So that's one of the great epic poems, the Mahabharata. And the Bhagavad Gita is a particular scene, a particular part of it, and it's this great dialogue between a warrior, Arjuna, who is about to prosecute this greatest war that's ever occurred, this war between the forces of righteousness and the forces of non-righteousness. So in a time where there was really black and white outside. And we'll discuss a little bit about what is shared with us in terms of these forces of evil and the forces of good. They're also inside and they're outside. So we can imagine a time where the good or dharmic character was really good, reliably good. And the bad guy, reliably bad. But still there was gray. And there's this exploration as well. So many translations. We use 4, and they're Swami Shivananda and disciples of Swami Shivananda, and they're the ones that I'm familiar with. That's the reason we use them. The most popular Bhagavad Gita version, translation in the US, is Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. And I'm not so familiar with that translation. I can't speak to it so much. It's written a bit differently than some of the others. But no doubt, I've met many people that study it and rave about it as well. So, but the core teaching is quite amazing. So this is the one for people joining us online. And here, I've ordered a few more copies of this for us when we're here in the ashram to have and to refer to. And if you want to have a copy at home, this is actually the one I recommend. It's called Living Gita. It's really all in English, by Swami Satchidananda. Swami Satchidananda is one of Swami Shivananda's disciples who came west after being with Swami Shivananda for 10 years or so. He went to Europe for a little bit and then he came to the US. He founded an organization called Integral Yoga, and it's very authentic lineage teaching. And he really adapted to the Western psyche very quickly. See, in the West, we're very jaded. And the way that we think is different from the way people think in other parts of the world. So, and if we're to learn, it's helpful if we can be with someone who can relate to how we think. So we'll each have our own details about how we think and how we relate to things, but there are also societal characteristics. And I used to hear, I'm from Missouri, you have to show me, something like that. You have to prove it, show me. People in India, for example, would have a lot more faith in a teacher than people in the US would have. So, right, we're pretty jaded here, that's what I mean. We're pretty jaded here. So he does such a good job of laying out this teaching in a style that's helpful to this Western psyche, where we can, and it really takes a lot of time to point out, to help us to look at our own experiences, to learn something about the teaching. And he's authentic in your teaching, but he'll shift some of the translations so that they're not exactly literal in order for the Western mind to understand it, to grasp it better. So generally, we'll use this, and I will always, these days, recommend to anyone starting Bhagavad Gita study that this would be a really good one to have. And then Swami Shivananda's, which was the first one that I read, which is quite classic, and we'll take these two slokas from his. Swami Chinmayananda. Swami Chinmayananda is the religious scientist. Mm-hmm. Swami Chinmayananda's mind is amazing. Such detail, such grasp, such firm grasp of esoteric concepts, and the ability in 1,000 words to say what some can say in 5 or 10. But if you can follow his 1,000 words, you'll get it a lot better.
Very scholarly.
Very scholarly, but also very happy. So his teaching is also practical for the one with a strong intellect. This one worked very well with me. I enjoy the sciences. I worked in the high-tech business for many, many years, for close to 40 years. And so I was always dealing with engineers and such. So this is an engineering book of the Bhagavad Gita. So I found this one when I came to this. I was with Swami, and a little story, it's just one of those things. I was with Swami Ramaswarup one day, and we were using this edition in our 9 a.m. And somebody at the local market, now how in the world does this happen? The local market, it's a little market where they sell cigarettes by each cigarette, and you can buy a scoop of sugar and things like that. So a lot of places in India don't have refrigerators and such. So it will sell bulk of anything. You can go and get a little bit. And the owner or shopkeeper of the market, and it's only the market, I call it a market, the entire store is a third the size of the satsang hall. 1/3 the size of the satsang hall. So I went over to see him, and we really liked each other. And one morning I went, and he handed me a copy of this and said, "Would you like this? I thought you might like this." How did he get it? I have no idea. And I took it back to Swami Ramaswarupananda. I'd heard of Swami Chinmayananda, but I'd never picked up this Gita. And he said, "Well, let's start to use it." So we did. So that was my exposure to Swami Chinmayananda. And then this one, this one's also, this is a bhakti devotional. This is Swami Venkatesananda. Swami Venkatesananda went to South Africa, to Cape Town, in order to take his master's teaching. And there's a photograph of Swami Venkatesananda and Swami Shivananda. So very much devotional, loving, sweet, but also razor sharp mind and photographic memory. And so he was lecturing on the Gita, and this is from his lectures called The Song of God. Okay. So when we start Bhagavad Gita class, the traditional way to do it is by chanting what is called the Gita Dhyanam. Gita Dhyanam is the meditation on the Gita. Of course, normally we would chant it in Sanskrit, and we wouldn't know what it meant. Swami Satchidananda gives this beautiful English translation of the Gita Dhyanam. And for today, sometime I'll make enough copies of this so that whoever's joining in the morning, we can read it together in English. This morning I'll read, so you can just bring your awareness to it. Om. O Bhagavad Gita, by which Arjuna was illumined by Lord Krishna himself, and which was composed of 18 chapters within the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. O Divine Mother, destroyer of rebirth, who showers the nectar of oneness on us. O Bhagavad Gita, my affectionate mother, on thee I meditate. All the Upanishads are the cows. The milker is the cowherd boy, Krishna. Arjuna is the calf. People of purified intellect are the drinkers. The milk is the supreme nectar of the Gita. My salutations to the Lord, who is the source of supreme bliss, whose grace makes the mute eloquent and the crippled cross mountains. And he adds, Swamiji adds his one little commentary to this. He says, this means that with the grace of God, nothing is impossible. So we'll discuss a little bit more over the next days. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about the imagery that's being offered in that Gita Dhyanam as well. Okay, are we ready? Sixth chapter is the yoga of meditation. Each chapter is called the yoga of something. And the sixth chapter is the yoga of meditation. And there are two slokas, and I'll read them. And we can read the commentary and discuss if we have questions or anything like this. First is this, number 5. One should raise oneself by oneself alone. And I get to see here small s and big S, and you don't. But if you listen carefully, you'll probably hear it. It's as if there are two of us inside. Peace Pilgrim would say like this. It's as if there are two selves. As if there are two selves. You ever notice that you get conflicting input inside? So it's as if there are two selves, she would say like that. The self-centered self, or the self-centered in the individual I, and the God-centered self, the self-centered in the good of the whole. So we could say in words that we're familiar with, my mind and my conscience. Right? You see, can we tell that often there's a difference? So sometimes we'll get the visualization of the monkeys or the birds on the shoulders or something like that talking with us. But and this is so, and in Bhagavad Gita and a lot of the teachings we work with this. It's said that you have a lower self and a higher self. And yoga really is about integrating the two. Lower self is the ego-centered nature. I want, I need, I must have. This is mine. Like this. So little I stuff. And the big S self is the self of all. Also called God, but you see, when we talk about God, in particular in the Western traditions, nothing wrong with them. But I remember hearing about God when I was very young. And I got trained out of the idea that God was inside because I kept hearing about God as if God's some authority outside of me. On a cross or something like that. Somehow looking out over me, but not in me and very much apart from me. That's the way I heard it anyway, back then. But in the Eastern teachings, we'll get something different. So the term God will be used often, many different names. But also often we'll get the term self, one's own self, but capital S. That conscience, that inner guru, that highest which is within you. You know, Jesus would say the kingdom of God is within. And seek ye first the kingdom of God. So it's actually not something different's not being said, but it's being said a different way. Does that make sense? It's just being said a different way. So capital S self is our own highest self. Small s self, this is the way we'll typically see it in these texts. So if you were reading it, you would see the two. offering, maybe you can hear it, and then we'll go back and say which is which. But so therefore, this sloka will sound weird. One should raise oneself by oneself alone. So which one's small s, which one's big S?
The first one's the small.
And?
The second is the large.
That's it. By oneself alone. So that great power within us. One should raise the little self by connecting with the God-centered self alone. Let not one lower oneself. Which is that?
The little one.
Little one. For the self alone is the friend of oneself. Large S and little s. And the self alone is the enemy of oneself.
Little self.
To the
Big self.
No.
The big self is the enemy?
Yeah.
Because the other's the ego.
And sometimes you'll get a translation like this. As if appearing outside as an enemy.
Where's my mom?
Geeta.
Wow, but
Oh, is that like at first you're disturbed?
No, she's not.
Oh.
What Jesus says or something like that?
Well, okay.
Have you seen my mom?
Here, let's read some of the commentary. We'll get it one more time, but I'll read the sloka one more time, and then we can read the commentary from Swami Satchidananda. One should raise oneself by oneself alone. So one should lift oneself up, but by connecting with one's own highest self. Let not one lower oneself. So let us not allow ourselves. There's a lot.
Desire.
The self alone, for the self alone is the friend of oneself, and the self alone is the enemy of oneself. So here's what Swami Satchidananda says. He says, practice yoga, capital Y, discipline the senses and the mind, elevate yourself and become a yoga ruda. Attain to yoga, shine gloriously as a dynamic yogi. Do not sink into the ocean of samsara or transmigration. Do not become a worldly-minded person. Do not become a slave of lust, greed, and anger. Rise above worldliness, become divine, and attain Godhead. And then about that mysterious part, he says, you alone are your friend, you alone are your enemy. The so-called worldly friend is not your real friend because he gets attached to you, wastes your time, and puts obstacles on your path of yoga. He's very selfish and keeps friendship with you only to extract something. If he is not able to get from you the object of selfish interest, he forsakes you. Does that resonate?
Oh, yeah.
So, I was learning this lesson the hard way. I wanted to have so many friends. And you know, when you have money, it's easy to have friends. But are they real friends?
Yeah.
You can have drinks with them, you can socialize with them.
Feed them.
Feed them.
They'll fluff your feathers.
They would give me strokes.
Yeah.
But then when the money was gone, where were they? When my interest changed, where were they? So are they real friends? And I would do the same, you know. At some point when I was playing that game, I would make a point of being around the people that I thought I could get something from. So, therefore, in reality, he is your enemy. If you are attached to your friend on account of delusion or affection, this will become a cause of your bondage to samsara. And then he says, friends and enemies are not outside. They exist in the mind only. It is the mind that makes a friend an enemy and an enemy a friend. I used to think that when somebody told me something I didn't like, that they were my enemy. But then later on I realized, but I had to learn something. Right? And then later on, is the realization, wait a second, there's only God here. This is a very tough realization, but it came. There's only God here. So who's actually talking to me? So I realize when I don't like something, that's just a reaction in my mind. Right? So if let's say your mother, father, God, your mother, father, wants you to be free. What would your mother, father want you to be free of? Suffering? Where's the cause of your suffering?
Your thoughts.
It's within me. It's within me. It's within my psyche. We learn that nothing outside independent, I mean, they can contribute to suffering for sure. No worries, somebody that's just can contribute to suffering, but the real suffering is an inner, the inability to be able to be present without being disturbed. So then, who is it that is contributing to the suffering, and who is it that's easing the suffering? Who is my friend? Who is my enemy? The friend would be the one who does what's in my best interest, not necessarily what I like. Correct? So the concept is that God is in the center, is one's friend and one's enemy. Both. Both. But really one's friend. In other words, as long as you take yourself to have an enemy, who is that you're taking to be your enemy? Yourself. Okay. I'm going to read one more translation and then we'll close for the morning. But number 6, the self, and this one is perfect. The self is the friend of the self, of him by whom the self has been conquered by the self. Capital S self. The self is the friend of him for whom the self, little s, has been conquered by the great self. So when we have surrendered ourself to the highest self, when we have surrendered this little self to the highest self, then the highest self is seen as my friend, my only friend. But only when the little self has been conquered, only when the little self has been submitted or surrendered to the highest. We'll read it a different way, see if it resonates better. But to the unconquered self, to the wild horse mind, right? The wild horse mind that has control of your life and that's calling on you to do this and that, calling on you to do its bidding, whatever it wants, right? And we become a slave to it. It will say, more money. And we'll go make more money, thinking somehow that's what's going to do it. More friends. More cocaine. I remember this one. Oh my God. More alcohol. It'll say like that. More girls.
More thrills.
More thrills. Gopalas would say, more heroin. Is that correct, Gopala?
Yeah, more travel.
More travel.
More travel.
More travel.
And then you get tired.
And then when it has conquered us, and we follow it around wherever it says to go, imagining that it knows the way to happiness, then it's not our friend. Then it's not our friend. That's what's being checked. And this conscience, this highest, will seem to be our enemy. When somebody tells you stop it, you'll run away from them. You don't know. You don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, my conscience told me not to finish this tattoo, and I didn't like that at all.
And you didn't like that at all. Right, I shared your story. My conscience told me to stop eating meat and stop eating fish, and I didn't even want to hear from it. So, I'm like, what are you doing? You're ruining my life. So that's what's being shared. Is to the one who's taking control of their mind, then the conscience, the great self, the guru, will be the friend. It will be the resource. It will be the light which we follow. It will be the great friend. But to the one whose mind is still in charge, then that conscience will seem like an enemy. Okay, we're going to read one more way. This is this. He said, Swami,
because after we follow the conscience and actually do what it says, we're happier.
yeah,
No doubt.
that's the thing, is it's leading us to happiness, but we still imagine it to be somewhere else. No, I'm sure it's in the heroin, just a little bit longer. Oh my God. You fulfilled that one for me, thank you.
Me too.
Many years.
Yeah, I was pretty sure I wasn't there though.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I'll check that box for you.
Thank you, no problem. Okay, here are the same two slokas said in a little different way. You can rise up through the efforts of your own mind, or in the same manner draw yourself down, for you are your own friend or enemy. As you gain control of your mind with the help of your higher self, then your mind and ego become your allies, but the uncontrolled mind behaves as an enemy. So another way to look at it. So we start the Gita study with this as some inspiration. What's being shared is that each of us have the power within ourselves to find and fulfill that goal of being happy. It's not outside of us, but it does exist within ourselves through our own practices. It's really very much what the Buddha says as well. Four noble truths. There's suffering. Suffering is of the nature of, or the cause of suffering is craving delusion. That the suffering can be cured, and that through your own practice you can do it. So here, this is what Krishna is saying. Is that within you is the hidden God, within you is the ability to lift yourself out of the mire. And so we'll see as we go through, we'll see how we've gotten into the situations that we've gotten into, and how do we get out. And that's really the intention of it. And have the ability to really explore and discuss and in whatever amount of detail we'd like to go into.
Yes. I knew that I would have to give up the little self before I came to ashram. But as soon as I came to ashram, the higher self did become the enemy of the lower, because he was fighting for the right to still misbehave. But not like it did before, in like new little ways. Until, I don't know what happened, but it's quiet.
Yeah.
And
it's called surrender.
Yeah, surrender. It
But
doesn't
surrender
give
is
you
the
a hard
hardest thing
time.
to do.
But it did for so long, a year at least.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, it does until it doesn't. We just keep bringing it back to the light. That's the thing. We just keep bringing the lower nature back to the light over and over and over again. That's abhyasa yoga. We just keep doing it. And just keep doing it. And in time, actually, the integration will happen. The lower nature will say, something like, I'm not in charge. And I like that.
Finds peace.
And it's like this big sigh inside.
Yes.
It's fun to serve.
Boy, what feel? No drug gave me that.
That's it.
So true.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? So we just are embarking. But it's good. It's good home reading if you'd like. I'd encourage it. This one in particular, Living Gita. It's fun. It's fun, and the stories that Swamiji shares to help illumine the slokas are really good stories. They touch the heart. So, okay. So we'll close with final prayers and arati on page 80. The very short version. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhi Pushtivardhanam Urvairukmeva Bandhanan Mrityor Mukshiyamamritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhi Pushtivardhanam Urvairukmeva Bandhanan Mrityor Mukshiyamamritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvairukmeva Bandhanan Mrityor Mukshiyamamritat Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O adorable Lord of mercy and love, let us abide in thee forever and ever. Om Bolo Sakuru Shivananda Maharaj Ki Jai. Om Bolo Sakuru Saraswati Mani Ki Jai. Sorry,